All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking today. It is Friday. It's a free-for-all. So they're all free-for-all. Every last one of them. You just call in if you're watching live. I hope you will. 240-242-5646. Really do want to have that dialogue. That's why we do this here. And, I get viewers. I know people watch. I hear from people. Not huge numbers, but some. But I'd love to talk to you. That would really be awesome. And I think that would help build up the stream as well. Don't forget, if you are viewing and you want to help, the first thing you can do, the best, well, I don't know if it's the best, but the first thing, just go ahead and click that subscribe bottom right. That's awesome. I really, really want you to do that. Just the more subscribers, the better. I get up to 500. I'm more than halfway there. I think I get a few little shekels maybe from our friends at Google, at Alphabet. I'm not even sure about that, but I believe that is the case. They will, in fact, pay me if I get enough people that watch their ads that they would put in the program on. I don't get any sponsors. I don't do sponsorships here. I don't ever intend to. I don't want to have to sell the program. I guess if there were some nonprofits that said, hey, we'd like to give you a little money, I probably would take it. I don't know. But that's about the only way I could see myself getting any money that I search for, that I seek. But that said, I take it from Google. I take it from Alphabet. You want to put ads in here. Of course, that might make the viewing, listening experience a little less pleasant for you folks, but we can always talk about that. That can always be revisited going forward. I'd love to have that that dilemma, right? Can I, is it compromising the viewer experience with ads that Google puts in? Is that a problem? And I'd love to have to deal with that problem, and I would if it did arise. Okay, the problems that I might face are far fewer, far less serious, obviously, than people who are being bombed, who are being dispossessed of what little they may have had. And that describes the situation in Gaza for sure. 43 more Palestinians killed in Israeli attacks across Gaza over the last 24 hours. So the Holocaust continues there, southwest of Israel, along the Mediterranean Sea. And there's nothing I can think of that's worse. We'll spend a lot of time. The program today is called The Shame and the Tragedy of Israel in the U.S., so we'll talk about that. It won't be just about Israel for sure, but that's a major part of it. Unless you call and you want to talk about something else, I'm happy to, of course, address that as well, anything that viewers bring to my attention. Israel is not confining its violence to Gaza. They have stepped up, they're never really, there's ceasefires. Israel agrees to ceasefires, and then they invariably break it. They launch missiles, they shoot a few people, and they say, oh yeah, we just had to respond. We're not the ones really responsible. It's somebody else who did it. They were walking in the wrong place, or their head got in the way of our bullet, that kind of excuse. But full-fledged attack, assault on southern Lebanon and Beirut, and that's because there have been launches against Israel. Not from Hezbollah, though, which I think has been largely destroyed, right? But from the Houthis. Israel is under fire from the Houthis in Yemen, and those are tough fighters. They have managed to withstand, I think, 2 decades of Saudi attacks, Saudi attempts to completely eliminate them, and the fitful support of the Saudis, right? The fitful support of those efforts to destroy the Houthis by the various U.S. administrations. Certainly Joe Biden launched attacks against them, and more recently, just in the past week, Trump has done so as well. And Trump's attacks are worse, according to the analysts, according to the observers. Trump's doing more harm to more civilians, causing more damage, and making us less safe in the process. So Israel is stepping up war. We're seeing endless war around the world. In Gaza, just the quick numbers, I always give you those little thumbnails or rectangles or what have you. Israel and the U.S. have killed and identified 50,251 Gazans since October 7, 2023. And of course, many on the ground, doctors, against genocide, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, other observers, journalists, many journalists being killed, of course, by Israel. That continues, including American, I believe, have been killed, certainly targeted by Israel. They have said, no, it's much worse. 50,000, of course, that's a medium-sized city now, right? I don't know if there's a city in Vermont that's as big as 50,000, maybe Burlington. So basically, the city of Burlington has been wiped out in terms of just identified victims. And again, many on-the-ground observers are saying the true count may be 4, 5, 6 times that. So hundreds of thousands of dead in Gaza. No one's saying it's less. I know you often hear critics of the pro-peace movement, of the anti-Zionist movement. You often hear critics say, oh, those numbers are just, you can't trust them, they're made up. But the fact is, every independent observer has confirmed that these numbers are conservative, that they're low, that they reflect the known deaths, the identified deaths, not the many, many bodies buried under rubble. And even the Israelis don't claim otherwise. They might say, oh, well, those numbers don't, they include Hamas fighters as well. But every male between the age of 17 and 70, according to Israel, is a Hamas member. And even if they are, does that mean it's okay to just take pot shots at them to kill them? I didn't know collective guilt was part of the Western Enlightenment, but I guess it is as far as Israel is concerned. Since March 18th, Trump and Netanyahu have killed 896 Gazans. That's a new number I saw today. I thought it might have been 898, but according to Middle East Eye, it's 896, and that includes the 43 people we mentioned earlier in this program that were killed yesterday in Gaza, and hundreds of children. So there's no way to look at this except it's a atrocity of an order, at least qualitatively, that's comparable certainly to the Holocaust. I mean, you have people that Israel has herded into a tiny little area, and Israel just keeps bombing and bombing and bombing them and shooting them and killing them. And there's nothing they can do. And nobody's stopping Israel. The U.S. is helping Israel. I know some folks don't want to hear about this. I don't know what to do. Nothing is more important. Nothing is more relevant. This is a moral test that the United States has completely flunked. I mean, we were getting D-minuses over the decades, and now we're hard F, as we completely fail. And, I would have given Trump up until, a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I would have given him like a D, right? Not an F. Now, you might say, well, Hal, you should have given him at least a C. I mean, after all, the bombs stopped falling. Right. That is true. But he also kept sending more and more weapons. In fact, he was sending the 2K bombs, the 2K pound bombs, which Biden, I guess you got to give him credit. He was only sending the 500 pound bombs, not the 2,000 pound bombs to Israel. So Trump was giving even more deadly, more destructive weapons to Israel. But yes, Witkoff did leverage enough of the White House's influence for a few weeks, for a few months, to at least greatly, massively reduce the carnage. But now it's back to extraordinary numbers. Haaretz magazine, I'm going to go through this article. I posted this at Halitics, which, by the way, if you're not a member, if you don't participate online in Halitics on Facebook, I really hope you will. I think it's a great resource. I'm very, very pleased with all the intellectual ferment there. I wish, honestly, yes, I do wish people were a little more open-minded. Okay, so it seems to me maybe more so the leftists or liberal commentators or posters are a little more resistant to any message coming from somebody that they deem as rightist or on the right, or even a message from me. I don't think too many people say I'm on the right. Some would, probably more to discredit me than based on any real evidence. But any message that the Democratic leaners and Halitics deem as insufficiently anti-Trump or insufficiently pro-democratic, they will discount. They will respond to, they will react to very, very negative. There does not appear on the left, at least, to be much willingness to acknowledge any flaws in the Democratic Party or anything but true and complete ugliness and evil in the Trump administration and in MAGA. Now, I shouldn't be too easy on the Republican posters and the conservatives or the MAGA posters, because their spidey sense is up all the time too. They're always worried about hearing criticism of Trump. They're always very, very reluctant to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, the current president has done some bad things. And they're very, very quick to defend him. But I'm going to have to really think a lot about this. I'm kind of the mind that maybe, just maybe, the Democrats are a little more close-minded when it comes to MAGA, that every single thing that MAGA's done is completely evil. And not only that, everything the Democrats do is defensible. I could be wrong, but I get that sense that they're just not, many of them, open to any criticism of the Democrat Party. It's very problematic. But the Democrat Party put us in this kit. And so you say, well, look, Trump's the one who's now fully enabling this guy, right? This Nazi who's on the screen there. Trump's the one who's fully enabling him, right? So why would you blame the Democrats? How could you do that? Why are you always pointing fingers at them? And my response is, well, right now, I am blaming Trump, for sure. I mean, Trump is guilty of genocide right now, his actions. He said, we're going to rain hell down on Gaza, right? We're going to punish the people of God, the children, the unborn in Gaza are going to be killed. Because why? I mean, it's not even like Hamas did anything wrong. They were just following the ceasefire timeline in terms of releasing prisoners and hostages. And Netanyahu didn't want to follow it anymore. He wanted to go back to war. He was very afraid he was going to get ousted from power. And so he just started bombing again, and Trump went along with it. Trump actually caved for him. Trump said, hey, you got to let the hostages out to Hamas, even though Hamas was already following the timeline to the letter. So, yes, it's Trump's fault. There's no excuse. But we foresaw that something like this could happen. We were very concerned. Americans who care about Gaza. Heck, Americans who care about Israel, who really care about Israel, not just who want Israel to be able to kill and destroy with impunity and immunity, but people who say, hey, no, the people who live in that region, Jew, Muslim, Christian, all of them should be able to live safely, securely, in peace. They should all have enough. Nobody should have too much. People who like that, like me, we were very concerned, that Trump would take office and would, be a full-throated supporter of the Israeli genocide. But we had no choice, right? I mean, the Democrats put us in a box. They said, no, Kamala will never break from Israel. She is never going to criticize Israel. She's never going to take on Israel. She's not going to call it a genocide. She's going to make a lot of noises and clucks and tut-tuts, but she won't actually do anything to stop Israel. But guess what? Your other choice, Trump, is even worse. So they dared us, right? They dared us not to vote for Harris. And then you had AOC out there. Oh, what has Jill Stein ever done, right? Trying every trick in the book to scare and terrify people into voting for their horrible, genocidal candidate. So yeah, I blame the Democrats too, and I blame people like, because had even Harris stood firm against Israel, she said, no, I've been looking, I'm on video, I'm on YouTube, and I'm looking at what Al Jazeera is telling me, and I've actually been, talking to people all over, and I know what Israel's doing is wrong, and if you elect me president, I will stop Israel. That's all she had to say. That's all she had to say. So yes, I absolutely blame her for what Trump is doing. Without any question, I blame the Democrats for what Trump is doing, because they put us in such a horrible, horrible spot. And Esther Solomon from Halitics describes just how awful it is. This is a really good article. We're going to go through it in some detail because she does a real nice job here setting forth, and I think it was just posted yesterday, setting forth just what Israel is doing, what Netanyahu is doing. So let me cut that off a little bit because it's a little bit fatter than the first page was there. So this week, Israelis woke up to war again, but not to the Hamas attack, but to a conscious decision by their government to restart, and she says fighting, I'd say killing, against the will of the popular majority in Israel. So what Halitics really tries to do is downplay how much animus there is throughout the Israeli populace, the Jewish Israelis against the Palestinians. I mean, there just is not sympathy. Maybe a few, right? Maybe 10% of the Jews really are against the killing. But it's not widespread. There's very little sympathy. I mean, I know this. I have Israeli friends who don't like what the government does and are not in any way allies of Netanyahu or the far right. They're not Likud. But they really hate those Palestinians. They do. They look down on them. They view them as, I guess, I don't know, Jew haters, subhuman. And they can't seem to quite grasp that Israel has brought that hate on itself. And the way you address it is you change the way you treat the Palestinian people. Will there still be a lot of anger, still be a lot of resentment? Of course. I mean, you can't just, magically wipe away 75 years, 76 years, 77 years of oppression, of persecution, of Holocaust, of genocide. You can't just do that. But, you start, you try, you do what you can. According to, you have to. We have a moral duty. We have a moral duty to treat our fellow human beings like human beings. So Esther Solomon points out that not only did Netanyahu start killing against the wishes of the Israeli people who don't want the war, they want the hostages released, but he's also waging a propaganda war and a war against what democracy remains in Israel. And obviously there can't be that much democracy if the country's going to continue the bombing or restart bombing, resume bombing against the wishes of the majority. That's not a democracy. Democracy is where the majority rules, but also the institutions that Israel still maintains, still retains of democracy. There's a lot of similarities, very, very similar to what Trump is doing. And we're going to go through that. And also war on diaspora Jews, so Jews who don't live in Israel, are also victims, according to Esther Solomon. And she makes a good case of Netanyahu's regime, his anti-democratic, militaristic regime. So she used a lot of pretty strong language, very strong. She says his vision for Israel, Netanyahu's, is ripping up and into confetti the fundamental values and social contracts that bind the state to its citizen and the state to the Jewish people outside its borders. So she's saying, hey, it's a Jewish state. We have responsibility to Jews outside the border. Now, I don't think there should be a Jewish state. I think it needs to be one country from the river to the sea that's for all the people who live there, regardless of religion, and all are protected, all are safe. That, to me, is why this is the tragedy. This show is called The Shame and the Tragedy of Israel and the U.S., because it didn't have to be this way. Because when the British mandate was realized in 1948 and Israel became an independent country, what could have happened, and it was consciously denominated a Jewish state. But Israel could have said, but you know what? We get it. We're called the Jewish state, what have you. We're going to make it the state of Israel for all who live here. All will be equal. I mean, that was a decision, was a conscious decision by David Ben-Gurion and the other leaders, the other Jewish leaders, that, hey, we're going to have our own country that's going to be Jewish run, and it's going to be for and by Jews. Not for and by the people who live here, but for and by Jews. Much as when the British, the English colonized the United States, colonized what was, America, whatever you want to call it, the 13 colonies to start out with, they said this is going to be for and by us. And the people who live here now, the native peoples, the indigenous peoples, we're going to push them out. We're going to keep pushing them out and pushing them out. And if they don't go quietly, we'll kill them. Or we'll try to enslave them. That was a failure because the native peoples just simply would not work for Europeans, even under threat of lashing, beating. Didn't matter. They would lie down and die. They would say, we cannot be slaves. We will just, that's not part of our ability. They just, they couldn't understand that, and they just couldn't do it. So they were instead exterminated. African people were brought over in chains. They were beaten. Their ties to their homeland were completely severed. They were completely divorced from any possible, liberation, because this land, the United States, was for and by the Europeans, most particularly the British English who settled it at the time in the 1600s, late, I guess the end of the 16th century, throughout the 17th century, 18th century, what have you. So Israel, the same thing. We are kicking you out. You are not Jewish, you go, you leave, you're out of here, you're done. And we're going to keep taking more and more of your land. We're going to keep taking more and more of your life away from you, of everything that matters to you. That didn't have to be. It did not have to be. That is what it became. That is what happened very, very quickly after 1948. Did not have to be that way. And even now, even after all the water under the bridge and all the harm done by Israel to the Palestinian people, all the killing, some by Palestinians of Israelis, some by Arabs and Muslims of Israelis, mostly the other way around, even now, it wouldn't have to continue. It doesn't. This is all by choice. This is the choice of Netanyahu. This is the choice of the Israeli military. This is the choice of the U.S. government. And it's a choice that's completely false, that's based on completely false premises, totally cruel. So Haaretz pointing out, Esther Solomon pointing out, the declared premise for breaking the ceasefire, that we've got to get rid of Hamas, we've got to destroy Hamas, we've got to force Hamas to capitulate, is false anyway. Even if you accepted that as a legitimate goal, which I most certainly do not, but even if you accepted that as a legitimate, if you're trying to get rid of a terrorist government, if that's the goal, if terrorist governments are supposed to be outlawed and eradicated, then why is no one talking about getting rid of Netanyahu? He's clearly a terrorist. The Israeli government, the right-wing government there, has been terroristic for decades. What about Trump? He's a terrorist. We saw the terror that ICE agents are inflicting on people in the streets of Boston and New York. Governments are terrorists. The W administration terrorized the people it tortured. What we did to Baghdad was pure terror. So this idea that because Hamas, there's some sort of, I don't know, what is it? Some sort of a fundamental theory or fundamental precept that we can get rid of Hamas because they're, in fact, we're right to because they're terrorists, ignores the fact that pretty much all powerful governments, Western governments, Eastern governments, Chinese, Russian, they're all terrorists. It is not a legitimate. You want to end the terror by Hamas, you sit down and you negotiate and you talk to them and you work with them and you figure things out. Just like the British were able to end the terrorism by the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, by talking, negotiating, and ultimately come up with the right solution, which is get the hell out of Ireland. At least Southern Ireland. But only negotiations will help the hostages. If that's the goal, which Netanyahu says is, then you engage in negotiations. You don't drop bombs. And they have worked. Every time Israel's negotiated, hostages have been saved. Hostages have come home. Hostage bodies have been recovered. Every time we drop bombs, more hostages are killed. And Hamas is not being destroyed. According to Solomon, I have no reason to disbelieve her, it's repopulated its ranks. No matter how many Palestinians you kill, there's going to be some who are going to say, in fact, the more you kill, there are going to be some who say, I'm going to do, I don't care. I'm just going to kill Israelis. I'm going to do everything I can. And maybe I'll kill Jews, right? Because it is the Jewish state. So that's part of the point that Esther Solomon is making is, hey, you're making us all less safe. You're not going to destroy Hamas. You're making, if anything, more popular. There are more people who are clamoring. And it's throughout the Arab world, right? I mean, it's not just, when Israel's under attack, you have Jews in the United States, or Israel's perceived as under attack. The Israeli Hasbara makes you think they're the victim here. American Jews go over there. My son did Birthright, and he didn't buy it. I don't know, you want to say whether it's moral or not. He did it before the current genocide went full bore by Israel. But, he didn't believe he doesn't support what Israel's doing, but he got a nice vacation, got to hang out with a bunch of college kids, had a good time. Why not? It's free. That's his attitude. He doesn't support what Israel's doing, but, he went over there. Some of his classmates joined the Israeli military. And by the way, it is all propaganda. They're met at the airport by soldiers who take them around. They find attractive young, officers or enlisted women and men, teenagers sometimes, early 20s. to, draw this picture of these good-looking, well-spoken Israeli soldiers. It's a recruiting event for Israel. Those birthright events, those birthright tours. And some of the students, some of the young people said, hey, I'm going to join the military. I'm going to join the Israeli army. So, I mean, this is what we're doing. This is what we're complicit in. Our own Americans are joining to kill Muslims. But this flip exact same thing happens on the other side, of course. You have, I think there's close to 1 billion Muslims around the world if you add up Indonesia, if you add in Indonesia and you add in Pakistan, Bangladesh. I guess Bangladesh isn't. No, it is Muslim. So if you add in all those countries, you get somewhere close to 1 billion. A lot more Muslims than Jews. And some of them look at what Israel's doing. They don't have to be propagandized like the American Jewish students have to be to join the Israeli military. They just have to look at TikTok and YouTube. And they know exactly what horrors are being rained down on their co-religions. 1.9 billion. Wow, I didn't realize it was that many. That seems like an awful lot. There's more Muslims than Christians? Probably not, but there are probably about that many Christians too, right? I didn't realize there were, a little over 2 billion Christians. Not realize there were 1.9 billion. Wow. Because India's mostly Hindu. There are some Hindi. There are some Muslims there. In any event, you're not going to be able to eradicate Hamas. Even if you paved Gaza over and the West Bank, you would find people throughout the Arab world and throughout Asia and even in the Americas who would say, we're going to go start killing Israelis. We're going to kill Jews. So if that's not the reason for this, what is? Why is Bibi doing this? Well, as Sir Solomon says, it's to satiate the annexationist warlust of the far right, to take more land. We want more and more land. We want our Lebensraum. We want places where we can settle. And also because Netanyahu is on borrowed time. When the war ends, he probably will at some point be voted out. They'll have to call elections. He'll probably lose. He'll lose his government immunity. He'll have to face criminal charges on corruption, on self-dealing. So let's just draw this out. And it's very important to realize this is exactly what the Nazis, the same rationale that drove the invasions by Hitler, especially of Russia. Because for whatever reason, maybe it just would have been too difficult, it would have been too challenging politically. After taking France, taking the Low Countries, Hitler wasn't prepared to resettle Germans west. I mean, they totally, they stole, they abused, they mistreated their the conquest countries in the West. But they didn't engage in wholesale mass murder the way they did in Russia against the Slavic people they considered inferior. And not just the Jews, but, millions and millions of Russians were killed and other nationalities. Belarus. Ukrainian Russians, not German-speaking Ukrainians, but Russian and Ukrainian speakers were just killed. And land was seized. Now, of course, significantly amount that was Jewish property, but other people's too. The whole goal was we're going to have this greater Germany. That's exactly what the Jews of Israel are doing. Not just plotting, they're doing it. They're seizing land, they're resettling in those areas, and they're pushing out and making it harder and harder and ultimately killing many Palestinians. So Israel's following the Nazi playbook to the letter. And the issue of keeping Bibi in power, I was looking for an analog with Hitler on that one. And I think, Hitler was clearly a nut, psychotic. He wasn't, like, Bibi's a sociopath, right? Clearly he doesn't have any concern for human life, either Israeli or Palestinian. But Hitler was just a nut, complete psychopath. But he also was motivated by the desire to stay in power. He knew at some point, when the war was lost, that if he sued for peace, the Allies would never accept him as except on trial as a war criminal. He was going to have to ultimately pay with his life what he had done. So, yeah, let's just keep fighting. Let's just keep I'll fight to the last German, because then I can stay alive a little longer in my bunker. And that's exactly what happened. And he killed himself when Berlin was overrun. And it was the end. But he fought. He forced his soul. I mean, they didn't have to. But the generals and the men in the Wehrmacht in the field, in the battlefield, on the battlefields, just kept fighting and fighting and dying and dying and dying and killing more Jews too, until the very end, because in large part, the Fuhrer, just like Bibi, wanted more time in power. More time not dead. And it can, she continues, Esther Solomon, pointing out that there's also this attack by Netanyahu on Shin Bet, which is an investigatory arm of the Israeli judicial system that is looking into various corruption allegations against both Netanyahu and his government more generally. And those corruption charges are very well founded. There's a lot of evidence to support them. Any full-scale investigation would lead to probably convictions, and certainly a lot of political upheaval in Israel, leading to the end of the Netanyahu regime. So, again, let's just keep the war going. Let's just keep distracting people. Let's also keep attacking any democratic institution that remains. Specifically, now it's interesting in this. So there's Cuttergate is what's being investigated right now. And this is where you see how the Palestinian people are so victimized, not just by Israel, but even, the billionaire oil sheiks, Qatar. They don't want war with Israel. They don't want to fight Israel. Israel's rich. Israel's powerful. They make a lot of money selling oil to the United States and American oil companies. Even though we're energy independent, but the oil's fungible, and we ship some oil out, and we bring some oil in from the Persian Gulf, and they, of course, sell to the West as well. So the emirs in Qatar have paid off Israeli government officials to get positive public relations. Well, that's illegal under Israeli law. I don't know if it is under the U.S., but it is there, and this would not go over well. And these are supposed to be Israel's diehard enemies, and they're paying you for positive PR. And instead, what Netanyahu does is go after the messengers, the media, and say, you're just trying to bring down our government. You're just a bunch of commies. All right, 240-242-5646. By the way, that's American political playbook as well. Anyone who criticizes you, you're an enemy. You're an enemy of the state. Certainly, we see that from Trump, but we also see that from the left as well. And it's so toxic for democracy. I thought this was one more point that I wanted to make about this Esther Solomon article, this op-ed, which she does such a good job in Haaretz. Although she does go after, Hamas, she says Hamas will fight to the last Palestinian. It's not true. Hamas has repeatedly agreed to ceasefires, has repeatedly gone along with Israeli demands. So it isn't true that Hamas is prepared to sacrifice every Palestinian or that Hamas is using Palestinians as human shields. It's not true. It's Israel that uses its own people and certainly Palestinians as human shields. She points out one more thing. I thought this was so interesting, that Israel is losing some influence. Israel has been pushing these anti-Semitism conferences, combating anti-Semitism. And some of Israel's best allies, right, are hardly Semitophiles, Jew lovers. Is that the word? Is that a word? Semitophile. I'm going to look that up. Are hardly Semitophiles, pro-Semitic? They have these, Hungary, the right-wing governments in Eastern Europe now, and representatives of European far-right parties have allied with Israel to a significant degree because they want to kill Muslims too. They hate Jews maybe, but they also hate Muslims, and they're perfectly happy to support the Israeli genocide. So they are pushing, Netanyahu is pushing these combating anti-Semitism conferences, which are also designed to kind of whitewash the far-right parties in Europe. And it hasn't worked. Apparently, the more liberal, more progressive Jewish leaders, the rabbis, and others throughout Western Europe have said, no, we're not going to meet with them. We're not going to listen to them. We don't want to have an anti-Semitism conference with them. And that's, positive. That is a positive development. Anything that causes Israel to lose face among the Jewish communities around the world, especially affluent Jewish communities. Jews can stop Israel. If we can band together, they're concerned. Israel is concerned about losing the support of Western Jewish communities. And so when Netanyahu said, hey, we want you to meet with these far-right parties, these representatives, we're going to all join together in a combating anti-Semitism conference, these representatives from U.S. and European Jewish communities said, nope, we're not going to be there. UK's chief rabbi, even the head of the ADL, head of the ADL is a horrible person, Jonathan Rosenblatt. But even Israel's president refused to host the far-right politicians. So Solomon does, cheerlead, she praises, she looks positively on this breakdown of Israel diaspora relations, recognizing that the Jewish communities around the world see themselves as potential victims of these far-right parties, these anti-democratic parties, not as potential allies of them, even though that's how Netanyahu views them. So it's a good thing. 240-242-5646. Now, I'm somewhat skeptical if anything Jonathan Rosenblatt does is probably wrong. I also thought this was very interesting, that whole idea of these anti-Semitism conferences, because we see that exact same dynamic here in the United States, where the far right here, the Trump administration, their allies, the hard right in Congress, is making a big show of how they're fighting anti-Semitism. And this was just a few days ago. Today's the 28th. So earlier this announcement was on Monday. And yesterday, On March 27th, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee held a hearing to address the continued anti-Semitic attacks and harassment against Jewish students. So again, we're going to present ourselves as Jewish allies, even though our policies are hurting Jews, even though our policies are anti-Jewish tradition that celebrates life, that celebrates humanity, that celebrates decency. We're going to present ourselves as allies of the Jewish community. And even though our policies are unwavering commitment to the Israeli genocide is making Jews less safe, we're going to present ourselves as Jewish allies. So this administration is doing terrible disservice to the Jewish community. Previous one did too. There are many Democrats who are taking the exact same tack. Now, the solution is we got to move away from the two parties. It's the only answer, only possibility. A lot of you are worried that the Trump administration is too powerful, too influential, that it can't be stopped. And I did a show earlier this week will the Democrats ever elect another president? I mean, I don't think there's any doubt they will. I'm not a fan of that party. I probably won't vote for them, but the idea that the Democratic Party is about to close its doors and shutter, it's kind of ridiculous. And here's pretty powerful evidence that the party is hardly about to fold. Trump pulls Elise Stefanik's cabinet nomination. Republicans fear they can't afford to lose their vote in the House. Well, if the Democrat Party is so weak, so feckless, how come Trump can't even be allowed, that Mike Johnson is telling Trump, you can't even take one of my representatives, who is, by the way, in a very deep red district. We might not get her back. We might not get a Republican back. We've got this ping pong setup. People go back and forth between two horrible parties that they hate. And now that Trump's in power, he's doing things that a lot of people just don't like. I get it. There was some poll that came out, Harry Enton saying Trump is more popular than ever. Maybe. But you've got a lot of angry Americans who are terrified they're going to lose their Social Security benefits, and with reason, who are terrified that they're not going to get Medicare, with reason, terrified that their medication costs are going to skyrocket, with reason. So we can see, just by exercising power for a few weeks, few months, the Republicans are starting to lose the support of many of their voters. They can't even afford to lose Stefanik. This is an opportunity for the left. This is an opportunity for progressive. Now, you could say, well, AOC, Bernie are taking advantage of that. They're campaigning in red districts, what have you, purple districts, which is the right strategy. But they're not leftist. They're not prepared to take on the corporate elites who control their own party, the corporate Dems. And as long as they don't, that cadre will be in control, will make the decisions, and we will not get the policies that we need, that we deserve. All right, 240-242-5646. Got a few more minutes left. We're not going to end the show yet. He pulls the Stefanik nomination for the UN ambassador because they need her in the House. Republicans need every single vote they can muster to pass their extreme reactionary agenda. And they are, specific concerns. And this really jumped at me, by the way. Republicans have raised alarms about this is Washington Post today. Republicans or yesterday rather. I guess it's probably Dateline today, but it was actually in the online edition yesterday. Republicans have raised alarms about lackluster fundraising ahead of a slate of special elections in Florida, as well as anger from constituents during town halls. Now, a lot of those angry constituents, it turned out, were Democrats, but even so, these are purple districts, so it's not like you're in northern Georgia, right, in Marjorie Taylor Greene country, where she wins by 30%, you've got narrow margins of victories in places like Omaha, in places like Tempe. And you can't afford to lose any votes. People are really mad at you with good reason. They're afraid with good reason. Although, if you want to tell me that the liberal media overstates and misleads, I won't disagree with you. I'm sure you have good examples. But in the end, what the American people really want, what we want a government that protects us from corporate elites and also from being victims of crime by, poor people. We want economic security. And neither party has offered us that. Both parties only point fingers and blame the other. Neither party has embraced policies that truly result in a better life for the American public. And so again, we ping pong back and forth between them. But the idea that the Republicans are somehow or will for a long time be ascendant and the Democrats are completely moribund, no. The only way we can stick a stake through the heart of either of these two corrupt, harmful, amoral institutions is by replacing them. And that's what I'm hoping you'll start thinking about doing. And that means voting green. That means voting for anyone who's not a Democrat or a Republican. If their, policies are good. This is interesting. Look at this. So in Florida, they mentioned Florida, Walz and Gates. Gates is gone. Gates, by the way, and I said this when he was nominated, Democrats should have voted for Gates. Democrats should not have torpedoed the Gates nomination. And I was absolutely right. Pam Bondi, who is the Attorney General, has been terrible. She is a complete corporate acolyte. She is not in any way beholden to the people. Gates was elected. Gates ran as a bit of a populist. Gates acknowledged the climate catastrophe. Gates talked about the need to take on big tech and the trusts. He supported antitrust activities. Bondi's nowhere to be found in any of that. Democrats wanted to scalp, so they got Gates scalp. And I remember having this argument with people, and I remember hearing over and over, well, Gates is a sexual predator and Gates had sex with teenagers and this and that. And okay, those aren't good. No one's defending that. But the question is, who's going to be Attorney General? He's going to be a better or a far less bad Attorney General. He'll do less harm to our country if he's Attorney General than whoever Trump replaces him with. And it was true. I was right. Gates is out of office. Bondi was not a congresswoman. She was an attorney prosecutor in Florida. She's been a terrible, terrible Attorney General for the American people. Democrats are outraising the Republican candidates in the districts that Walz and Gates represented. It's a big story. The fears of the Democratic demise have been greatly exaggerated. All right, it's been an hour. God, I've been going on for an hour, and I've just pretty much stayed with one topic, which is sort of unfortunate, I suppose. I mean, I have a lot more to go through, but I'm not going to. I don't know if I'm going to do a live program Monday. We'll have Tuesday with Arlen. I will be recording with Carlos on Sunday. And what I want to talk about with Carlos was critical to my way of thinking right now. Is AOC a stealth candidate? I really want to hear from Carlos. Carlos is younger, great contributor to this program. He's got his finger on the pulse of the Democratic Party and what young people care about. And AOC, she's not quite as young as obviously when she was first elected in 18, I guess? She was still in her 20s. She's old enough to run. She will be old enough in 28 to run for president. I think she's 35 now, which is the age. Regardless, she'll be old enough, is the minimum age to be president. Regardless, she'll be old enough in 3 years to run for president. So the question I have for Carlos and for you, and then we're going to talk about this, is AOC a stealth candidate? Is she pretending to be pro-democratic establishment? When she says to the people of Tempe, Arizona, when she flat out lies, makes an absolutely absurd statement, you have two fantastic senators, and they're both corrupt, clearly, provably corrupt. When she says something that she knows is false, is she saying it just because she's trying to smooth them down until she can become president, and then she's going to take over and really, cut these people out, cut the legs out from under them? Is that what she's trying? Because if she is, that's awesome. I remember when Hillary ran for president, and I said to people, I was, telling again, and I gave all the reasons. Liz as long as my arm, all the things she had done that were so bad and why I didn't support her. And then people would come back with, well, Bernie this and Bernie's that, and you're a Hillary hater and this and that. And I would say to them, you make these points about Bernie, but none of them are true. And here's the evidence. But I'm curious. What do you need to see that would change your mind? Because I've given you what I believe to be very, very powerful evidence that Hillary is not on your side, that she will not fight for the American people. She will not fight for poor, struggling, working people, that she's a militarist. She's a corporatist. She's a self-dealer. She's dishonest. I think the evidence is overwhelming. I don't think it can be gainsaid. But you're not convinced. So what would convince you? What evidence would you need to see? And I never really got an answer. But one person came back to me and said, well, what do you need to see to support Hillary? We feel Hillary's really good. We think she's done all these wonderful things. She's the, U.S. Senator from New York. And she did have the Hillary care when she tried to get Hillary care through, and she this and she that. So we think she's great. You don't like her? What would cause you to like Hillary? So I said, well, at that time I was a big proponent of the $15 minimum wage, which I still am, but it's not good enough. You can't just impose a much higher government minimum wage without protecting American jobs. Otherwise, you're going to accelerate the offshoring of jobs. Now, Trump, with his tariffs, actually is protecting American jobs. So we could and should impose a minimum wage. But at the time, I was a big proponent, and Bernie was talking a lot about the $15 minimum wage. So I said, well, one thing she could do is come out and say she's for the minimum wage hike to $15 an hour. That's one thing. She could just embrace progressive policy. She could be very, very clear. And she could acknowledge she's made a lot of mistakes in the past. And I said another thing that would cause me to be less critical of Hillary would be if I were persuaded that her past corporate record, her pro-corporate record, going to Haiti to, suppress a minimum wage hike there to 61 cents an hour for the black women who make shirts and things. If I were convinced that all of that was done simply to placate corporate elites and to fool them into thinking she was on their side, and that she really also isn't a warmonger, and that if she became president, she would renounce her past neo-lib, neocon roots. If you could persuade me of that, I would support her. So if that were the case with AOC, when AOC goes and says, oh yeah, Kamala's working tirelessly for a ceasefire, well, AOC knew that was a lie when she said it. Obviously, it was false. We've proven it's false because a ceasefire would come about if you withheld arms from Israel and you sanctioned Israel. And Kamala made absolutely clear repeatedly that she would never do either one. So we know that AOC was lying when she said that. But if AOC were lying because she wants to get over on these corporate M's and fool them into thinking she's really on their side and sucker them and make chumps of them, and if she's really lying to them, then I would be, okay, yeah, good. So that's what I want to ask Carlos. Do we really think, because AOC, when she first ran for Congress, was progressive, or she certainly presented herself as a progressive. So if she is, and everything she's done that appears to be separating herself from those roots is really just an act, I'll support her. And with that, I'm going to save some of my stories for next week that I was hoping to get to, but I spent so much time on that Haaretz piece. I thought it was so important that we see just how shady Netanyahu is, just what a shame and a tragedy it is that Israel has fallen to such a low that he is their prime minister, and that we fully support him, both the Democratic and Republican parties. And we didn't need to. It didn't have to happen. So that was this day, this Friday's Halitics. I shall return, at least on your YouTube channel at noon Monday, even if I'm not live. But you'll find out. You'll learn. You'll see. Thanks for being part of Halitics. And again, don't forget to click like, click subscribe, even more than that. I don't think I did my little like button. It's okay. I don't need to. And there's your little Friday free-for-all poster I put together. I'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.